Second book of Samuel, chapters 19 to 24 today, and that will finish off the book of 2 Samuel. We pick up with Joab, the guy who stabbed Absalom when he was hanging from the tree by his hair. He's giving David a bit of a telling off because David's mourning the death of his son, you know, sort of fair enough. But Joab's feeling is that this is somewhat invalidating of everybody else who's a bit miffed about what Absalom did. Not least the fact that Absalom tried to kill a lot of those people. To his credit, again, David takes the point and does seem to do something about trying to address this issue with his soldiers and all the rest of it. This whole section is a bit of a mess, actually. It's little bits here and there. A lot of arguing between the Israelites about what happened between David and Absalom. Because I guess, you know, this is before WhatsApp and social media and Sky News or whatever. So people weren't getting updated. It's difficult to relate to that, isn't it, actually, in terms of how much people would have known or not known. But yeah, lots of arguing. There seems to be some fighting, but it seems very sort of localised rather than civil war sort of level of fighting. And yeah, that's sort of characterising this last section, which is a bit of a mess. There's a 3-year famine that just randomly comes along, and God tells David, not clear how he tells him, because he usually was doing that through Nathan, but it just says God tells David, that this is because Saul killed the Gibeonites. The in that sentence suggests that he killed all the Gibeonites, but that's clearly not the case. And Saul's dead anyway, of course, so it seems a little bit silly. It's also the first mention of Saul killing Gibeonites, so it's a bit weird and comes out of the blue, but then the backstory is sort of explained in that it's mentioned that Saul, or the Israelites, had an oath with the Gibeonites they weren't going to kill them, and Saul then went and did it anyway, as was Saul's way. If you recall, he kept saying to David he wasn't going to kill David, then kept throwing spears at him and missing, fortunately. David anyway goes to the Gibeonites and says, what would make it better? I'm really sorry that you were nearly wiped out by my predecessor. What can I give you to make that okay? And they turn around and say, well, we'd like 7 of Saul's descendants so we can kill them. And you can envisage David sort of sat there, I beg your pardon. But no, David just says, yeah, sure, okay, that's fine. No more said about it, but I assume 7 of Saul's descendants, or rather little more is said about it. He does make the point that Mephibosheth, was that his name? I think so, from the previous video, earlier video. He's not given over to them, but 7 of the others' descendants are, and yeah, that's of its time, I guess, isn't it? We then have some more battles with the Philistines, several more of these. At one point, it sounds like David gets into trouble and is nearly killed. All a bit vague, obviously. And at this point, his soldiers basically decide no more battle for you because it's too risky that we could lose the king. A bit odd, but there we go. I suppose, to be fair, it makes sense that putting your king in the middle of it when they could be killed. There's also mention of some dude from the city of Gath who has 12 fingers and 12 toes. Great, thanks. David then sings a very long song about God, which basically is a retelling of what's just happened in the rest of this section and how wonderful God is. It's all very nice. Doesn't translate very well into English, and it doesn't rhyme. It's just, yeah, great. Okay, so we'll move on. We then randomly have, I'm sure it's not random, but it seems random that God is angry at the Israelites again. It's not clear what for. And he gives David a choice, basically, of what the punishment is going to be. And the Israelites can either have 3 years of famine. I assume this is after the 3 years of famine we had earlier. He can have 3 months of the Israelites fleeing from their enemies, or he can have 3 days of a plague. David chooses the plague, which is an interesting game, isn't it? Which would you choose? And I suppose David's makes sense. It's all over in 3 days, but it does note that 70,000 people died. So how would you weigh that against 3 years of famine? I don't know. We also have God asking David to check the number of Israelites of fighting age, or anyone who can hold a sword, or men who I think it has to be who can hold a sword. And it's noted that there's 800,000 in 11 of the tribes of Israel, and an additional 500,000 in the tribe of Judah. And it's weird that it's separated like that. I don't understand why that's separated. Although, given the tribe of Judah is presumably 1/12 of the whole of Israel, proportionally they've got a lot more soldiers. But then no battle seems to come forth. So not quite sure what's that going on with that. And it's, I say, not clear what the sin is anyway. As part of the 3 days of plague, it suddenly talks about some angel who's busy striking people down. And I assume that's metaphorical, but it says that David goes to this angel and says, I want to take the punishment. Punish me and not my people. You know, good noble king stuff. And then a big old faffing bit where he has to buy some land off someone else and he has to build an altar there, and there's a big old faff and hoo-ha there. David builds the altar anyway and then the plague ends. But it is nuts. Completely nuts. I don't know how to do a short version of that part of the story, but it's messy as hell, those last few chapters. And I don't know, the theme that sort of comes through that a little bit is that the shine is coming off David a little bit. I'll have to move on and see if that's true. But that's certainly the way that feels like that's going. In terms of the interesting points to pull out of that, there's one of this sin that David is supposed to have committed, but it's not clear what it is. Completely possible I've just missed it, obviously. If anyone knows, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. But yeah, I don't know what it is, and Israel gets punished for it anyway. David seems to try and be noble about it. I don't think he's stolen any more wives. There's certainly no mention that he's stolen any more wives. And then the other interesting point, I think, is just how the end of the book just sort of feels like it falls apart. Given that this was supposedly written by Samuel, and Samuel died some time ago, he can't possibly have written this last bit. So maybe it's just the author has switched and this one is not very good or something, or it was rushed at the end. But yeah, there's sort of random little bits, and it just all went a bit crazy at the end there. Anyway, so that is now finished the book of 2 Samuel. The next video next week will be the summary of that, before we move on to the book of 1 Kings, or first book of Kings, however you say it, I don't know. And we'll see what we find out in that.